The gunshot tore through the dawn like thunder splitting a summer sky. Iana Redhawk woke with her hand already moving. Her fingers found cold steel beneath the bed frame before her eyes fully opened. The Winchester Model 1873 slid into her grip, smooth as water. 44 caliber. Her grandfather had won it in a card game 20 years ago. She knew every scratch on its walnut stock, every slight pull to the left when the barrel heated up. Outside, men laughed. Horses screamed. Another shot punched through the morning air. She rolled to the window and pressed her spine flat against the adobe wall. Through the gap in the wooden shutters, dust swirled gold and orange in the first light of sunrise. 3 riders circled the yard like wolves testing a wounded deer. Their horses kicked up clouds that turned the world to fire and shadow. One rider aimed his pistol at the chicken coop and squeezed the trigger. Feathers exploded into the air. The hens scattered shrieking into the morning. The tallest rider cupped his hands around his mouth. "Redhawk, get your ass out here! Mr. Crane wants a word!" Behind Ayanna, floorboards creaked beneath her father's weight. His labored breathing filled the small room as he struggled to rise. The old shotgun scraped against the wall when he lifted it. "Father, stay down." Thomas Redhawk did not stay down. He never had, even now, when every breath cost him something he could never repay. He appeared beside her at the window, swaying, trembling, the shotgun shaking in hands that had once been steady as mountain stone. Ayanna looked at him. Really looked. Her father had worked the copper mines for 11 years. The timber camps for 3 more after that. Every job the white men considered too dangerous, too backbreaking, too likely to kill a man slowly from the inside out. Thomas Redhawk had taken those jobs because they paid, and because a man with Apache blood did not get to choose his labor in the territories. Now the mines lived inside his chest. Each cough brought flecks of blood to his lips. Each night brought the rattling wheeze of a man drowning on dry land. "I know that one." Thomas pointed through the gap in the shutters. "The tall man, Dutch Harmon, works for Silas Crane." Dutch Harmon. Ayanna studied him through the wooden slats. He sat easy in his saddle, comfortable as a man in his favorite parlor chair. A thick white scar ran from his left temple down past his cheekbone, disappearing into his collar like a river vanishing underground. His left eye was milky and dead, but his right eye moved constantly, touching everything, cataloging weaknesses, missing nothing. The other 2 riders were younger, nervous. Their hands never strayed far from their holsters, hired muscle, disposable. But Dutch was different. Dutch was a weapon that had been sharpened by decades of killing. Ayanna recognized the stillness in him, the patience of a predator who never needed to hurry because prey always made mistakes eventually. "Keep Sam and Lily inside," she told her father, "no matter what happens out there." She stepped onto the porch before he could argue. The morning air bit cold against her skin. She held the Winchester at her side, barrel pointed at the packed dirt. Not threatening, not yet, but ready. Dutch turned his horse toward her. That single working eye swept over her body, like a hand checking livestock for defects. Slow, deliberate, making sure she felt every second of it. "Well now," his voice came out soft as silk, almost pleasant, like honey poured over broken glass. "The little Apache princess herself. Your daddy too yellow to come out and face us? My father is resting. State your business and leave." Dutch smiled. The expression touched only his mouth. His eyes stayed flat and cold as river stones in winter. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canvas sack. Dark stains spread across the bottom where something wet had soaked through. He tossed it at her feet. The sack landed with a soft, heavy thump. Ayanna did not look down. She already knew. The smell reached her first. Copper, meat, death. The sack had fallen open, and from the gap she could see brown fur matted with dried blood. One torn ear, half a muzzle. The rest was too damaged to recognize. Scout. The old hound had slept at the foot of her bed since she was 11 years old. He had followed her through the hills when she went hunting, pressed his warm body against hers on cold winter nights when the wind howled outside and the world felt empty and cruel. Found him wandering near the creek. Dutch's voice cut through her grief like a blade through soft flesh. Figured you would want him back. The two younger riders laughed, high and sharp, the sound of men who hurt things simply because they could. Ayana's finger brushed the trigger guard of the Winchester. She could kill Dutch before he cleared leather. She was certain of it. At this range, in this light, she could put a bullet through a playing card. One shot through that dead eye, punched through to his brain, and he would be off his horse before he knew he was dying. But the other two would gun her down before she could work the lever for a second round. Then they would go inside, and Sam was only 10 years old, and Lily was 7, and her father could barely stand without a wall to hold him up. She let her hand relax. Dutch watched the calculation happen behind her eyes. His smile widened. Smart girl. He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. Thick paper, official looking. He dropped it beside the bloody sack. Mr. Crane sends his regards. You got 7 days to settle what is owed. After that, he shrugged like a man discussing the weather. Well, next time it will not be the dog. He wheeled his horse and rode out without looking back. The other two followed, firing their pistols into the air, whooping like boys playing at being dangerous men. Ayana waited until the dust settled and the hoofbeats faded to nothing. Then she picked up the envelope. Her father had come to the doorway. Sam and Lily pressed against his legs, their faces pale as bleached cotton, their eyes too large for their small heads. Lily was crying, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. She had learned to cry without sound because sound attracted attention, and attention was rarely kind to Apache children. Do not look, Ayana told them. Go back inside, now. She tore open the envelope. The paper inside was thick and expensive, covered with numbers and legal language that twisted and coiled like snakes. Her eyes found the figure at the bottom of the page, and stopped. This was wrong. They owed money, yes. Her father's medicines. The lean seasons when crops failed and game grew scarce. Small loans from the general store, carried forward year after year because there was never quite enough to pay them off completely. But the number on this paper was 3 times what it should have been. Interest calculated at rates Ayana had never agreed to. Fees for services never rendered. Penalties for payments that had been made on time but recorded as late. And at the bottom, a signature that looked almost like her father's handwriting. Almost, but not quite. Silas Crane had not sent Dutch Harmon to collect a legitimate debt. He had manufactured one. And in 7 days, when they could not pay what they had never truly owed, he would take everything. The land had belonged to her family for 3 generations. Her grandmother had been born in the small back room where Sam and Lily now slept. Her mother had died in that same room, bringing Lily into the world, her blood soaking into floorboards that still held the memory of that terrible night. Every spring for 19 years, Ayana had planted corn in soil that held the bones and stories of everyone she had ever loved. Now Silas Crane wanted it for his railroad. She had heard the rumors circling through the territory like buzzards over a dying animal. Crane was building a private line to connect the silver mines in the northern mountains to the main junction 40 miles south. The shortest route ran straight through the Rio Seco Valley. He had bought out most of the other families already. Some had sold willingly, grateful for money they had never expected to see. Others had been persuaded through methods that left no marks visible to the law. The Red Hawks were the last holdouts, the last obstacle between Silas Crane and everything he wanted. That night, Ayana sat with her father at the kitchen table. The oil lamp burned low, its flame guttering in drafts that crept through cracks in the adobe walls. Shadows pooled in the hollows of his face and made him look ancient, dying. He had stopped trying to hide the blood in his handkerchief. I cannot protect you anymore. The words came out broken, each one a small surrender. I thought I could. I thought if I worked hard enough, long enough, gave enough of my body and soul. But I am finished, daughter. The mines took everything and gave nothing back. Ayana covered his trembling hand with her own. There are men out there. He would not meet her eyes. Shame bent his shoulders like a physical weight pressing down from above. Men with land, with standing, with the power to keep you safe. A man like that could give your brother and sister a roof that cannot be taken, a future that does not depend on my failing lungs. She understood what he was asking. The shame of it seemed to shrink him before her eyes, growing smaller, growing old. A father asking his daughter to sell herself so her siblings might live. Father, I know. His voice cracked and splintered like dry wood. I know what I'm asking. What kind of father says such things? But I have looked at every path forward, and I see no other way. Neither of them spoke. The weight of unspoken words pressed down like a hand on the chest. Iana did not sleep that night. She sat on the porch with the Winchester across her knees, watching the road that led down into the valley, waiting for Dutch Harmon to return and finish what he had started. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Coyotes called to each other across the darkness. The wind carried the smell of sage and dust and the faint copper memory of Scout's blood still staining the dirt of the yard. She thought about freedom, not the freedom men talked about in speeches and newspapers, the kind they wrote into laws that never seemed to apply to people with skin like hers, but real freedom, the kind you could feel in your bones when you stood on a high ridge and looked out at land that answered to no one. She had tasted that freedom once, long ago, before the debts piled up, before her mother died, before her father's lungs began their slow collapse. Now she understood that freedom was not something you held in your hands forever. It was something you lost, piece by piece, day by day, until one morning you woke up and discovered you were trapped in a cage built from paper and signatures and numbers you could never pay. Dawn came slowly. Gray light crept over the eastern hills. The stars faded one by one, and up the road from the north, a single rider appeared. He came alone. No escort, no armed men at his back. Just one figure on a dark bay horse, moving at an easy pace, as if he had all the time in the world and nowhere particular pressing him forward. Ayanna raised the Winchester. The rider stopped at the fence line and dismounted, slowly, deliberately, making no sudden movements that might spook a woman with a rifle aimed at his chest. He wore no fine clothes. His hat was weathered gray, his coat patched at the elbows, his boots scarred and cracked by years of hard use. But he sat his horse like a man who had spent more of his life in the saddle than out of it. He removed his hat before speaking. Name is Caleb Walker. I run a ranch up in the high country, 2 days north of here. I am not here to cause you trouble. Then state your purpose and leave. He looked at the bullet holes in the chicken coop, the dark stain in the dirt where Scout's blood had pooled and dried, the envelope still sitting on the porch rail where Ayanna had left it. Crane, he said, not a question. Thomas had limped to the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame for support. Caleb turned and nodded to him. A gesture of acknowledgement. One man to another. Respecting the head of the household even when they both knew that title had become mostly ceremonial. I will speak plain, Caleb said. I do not have time for anything else. Crane is coming for my land too. Different excuse, same methods. He wants the water rights in the high country. Whoever controls the water controls everything downstream for 100 miles. I have fought him alone for 2 years now. I am losing. He paused. Let the words settle in the morning air. I need someone who knows Apache land, who can track game and men across rock and sand, who can shoot straight when shooting matters. I have asked around the territory and your name keeps coming up. Ayanna said nothing. She waited. I am offering a partnership. If you agree to marry me, your family's land falls under federal protection laws. Married property cannot be seized without due process in territorial court. Crane's pocket judge cannot touch it. I will clear the manufactured debt. I will bring your father and siblings to my ranch. Legal work, fair wages, a roof that will stand through any winter. The words hung in the cold morning air, like smoke from a dying fire. I will not promise you love. Caleb's voice remained flat and honest. That is not something any man can guarantee, and I will not lie to you. What I can promise is protection that carries weight, work that pays honest wages, and a fight worth fighting. Thomas made a sound in his throat, half protest, half relief, the sound of a drowning man finally seeing land after days in open water. Ayanna studied Caleb Walker. His hands were broad and calloused, scarred by rope and wire, and the rough work of building something from nothing in country that did not forgive mistakes. His eyes were steady and gray as winter storm clouds. He looked at her the way a man might look at a potential partner in a cattle drive, assessing capability, measuring strength, not concerned with beauty or charm or any of the soft things men usually wanted from women. This was not a proposal dressed in flowers and pretty words. This was a door, opened wide, with no attempt to hide what waited on the other side. Ayana looked at her father who could no longer protect them, at the house where her mother had died and her grandmother had been born, at the land that would be stolen from them in 7 days unless something changed. When do we leave? They traveled by night. The moon rose fat and silver over the mountains, casting everything in shades of bone and shadow. Caleb led the way, reading the darkness like other men read newspaper headlines. Ayana rode at the rear of the column, watching for followers, her Winchester balanced across the saddle horn, ready to swing up and fire in half a heartbeat. Between them, Thomas drove the wagon that held everything the Red Hawk family owned, which was not much. A few changes of clothes, some cooking pots blackened by years of use, the family Bible with names and dates written inside the cover going back 4 generations. Sam and Lily huddled under wool blankets in the wagon bed, too frightened to sleep, too exhausted to stay fully awake. The second night, they entered the canyon called Diablo. Walls of red stone rose on either side like the ribs of some enormous beast long dead. The trail narrowed until the wagon wheels scraped and sparked against rock. Sound echoed strangely here. A horse's snort bounced between the walls and returned to something deeper and hungrier. Ayana's mount grew nervous beneath her, ears flicking forward and back, nostrils flaring wide, picking up scents and sounds that human senses could not detect. She had heard stories about this place since childhood. Outlaws used the canyon as an ambush point. Desperate men with nothing left to lose who waited in the shadows for travelers foolish enough to pass through at night. Men who had forgotten how to live any other way. Caleb raised his hand. The column stopped. Ahead, barely visible against the darkness, a thin thread of smoke rose toward the stars. Firelight flickered orange against the canyon wall. Voices drifted on the still night air, too far away to understand the words, close enough to count the speakers. 4 men, maybe 5, camped directly across their only path forward. Caleb turned in his saddle and caught Ayana's eye. He made a small gesture with 2 fingers. Stay here. Wait for my signal. He dismounted in silence and moved forward, keeping to the deep shadows along the base of the canyon wall. Within seconds, the darkness swallowed him whole. Ayana watched the space where he had disappeared. Then she handed her reins to Thomas. Keep the children quiet, she whispered, no matter what you hear in the next few minutes. She climbed. The rock face was rough beneath her palms, full of handholds and crevices worn by centuries of wind and water. She moved the way her grandmother had taught her when she was young enough to believe the old woman would live forever, placing each foot where it would not slip, shifting her weight like water flowing over stone, making no sound that might carry. Within minutes, she had reached a ledge overlooking the camp. 4 men sat around a small fire, their faces red and shadowed in the flickering light. Their horses stood hobbled nearby, heads down, dozing. Rifles leaned against saddles within easy reach. Pistols hung from belts. Not random outlaws. She recognized the brand on the nearest horse. A crooked C burned inside a circle. Crane's mark. This was no coincidence. Crane had anticipated their route. These men had been placed here specifically to stop them, to kill them, to make sure Ayana Redhawk never reached the safety of Caleb Walker's ranch. Below and to the left, a figure emerged from the shadows on the far side of the camp, walking unsteadily, singing off-key, stumbling like a drunk who had wandered away from his companions and gotten hopelessly lost. Caleb. 2 of Crane's men reached for their weapons, rising from their seats by the fire. Ayana did not wait for permission. The Winchester kicked hard against her shoulder. The shot cracked through the canyon like thunder echoing off the walls. One of the men spun and fell, his pistol flying from his grip, his gun hand suddenly blooming red with blood. Caleb dropped the drunk act in the same instant. His Colt cleared leather before the echoes died. 2 shots, 2 men down. Perfect accuracy even in near-total darkness. The kind of shooting that only came from years of practice and the cold clarity of a man who had killed before and made peace with killing again. The 4th man ran. His footsteps faded into the canyon depths, swallowed by stone and shadow. Silence returned. Caleb looked up at the ledge where Ayanna crouched, rifle still smoking in her hands. His face was unreadable in the dim moonlight that filtered down between the canyon walls. He did not praise her for acting without orders. He did not criticize her for taking the initiative. He simply nodded. Once, short and sharp, that was enough. The Walker Ranch spread across high country that stole Ayanna's breath the first time she saw it. Rolling grasslands stretched toward mountains still capped with spring snow that glittered like scattered diamonds in the morning sun. The air smelled different here, cleaner, thinner. Each breath came easier than the last, as if the altitude itself was washing the dust of the lowlands from her lungs. The buildings clustered around a natural spring that bubbled up through ancient granite. The main house was built of local stone, low and solid, designed to withstand winters that could kill unprepared men in hours. Barns and bunkhouses flanked a central yard swept clean of debris. Guard towers stood at the corners of the property, manned day and night by men with rifles who watched the approaches with careful eyes. This was not just a ranch. This was a fortress built by someone who expected trouble. Built it after the war, Caleb said, noting her assessment. I saw enough things burn between 61 and 65. I promised myself I would never again build something that could be easily destroyed. Men and women worked across the property in the golden morning light. White faces, Apache faces, Mexican, black. Former soldiers still carrying themselves with military bearing. Former slaves who had walked north to freedom and kept walking until they found work that paid. Former outlaws looking for a second chance they probably did not deserve. All of them moving with purpose. All of them answering to the same rules. A gray-haired man with a pronounced limp approached as they dismounted in the central yard. His eyes moved over Ayanna without warmth or hostility, simply measuring what he saw against what he had expected. Henry Cole, Caleb said by way of introduction. My foreman. We fought together at Chickamauga. Henry grunted. His face looked like leather that had been left out in the sun for too many seasons. So this is her. This is my wife. The word hung in the morning air like a challenge. Henry's weathered face revealed nothing, but something shifted behind his faded blue eyes. Doubt, assessment, questions he was too professional to ask out loud in front of the other hands. She know anything useful? Or is she just here to warm your bed and look pretty? Caleb turned to Ayanna. His expression remained carefully neutral, but she understood what was happening. This was a test, the first of many she would face here, and no one was going to fight her battles for her. I know land, she said. Her voice came out steady and clear. I know animals and weather and the signs that tell you when a storm is coming 3 days before it arrives. I know people who are lying and people who are telling the truth. The rest I can learn fast enough. Henry studied her for a long moment. His eyes were the color of faded denim, hard and skeptical, and completely unimpressed by words. We will see, he said. He turned and limped away without another word. The first weeks on the Walker Ranch tested everything Ayanna thought she knew about herself. The ranch hands watched her constantly, waiting for mistakes, hoping for failure. Something to prove that Caleb had made an error in judgment, bringing an Apache woman into their midst. Some tested her openly, ignoring her instructions, questioning her decisions in front of others, making her repeat herself again and again until her voice grew hoarse and her patience wore thin. One man laughed out loud when she assigned him to muck out the horse stables. You sure you know how things work around here, girl? Arguments would change nothing. Complaints would earn her nothing but contempt. She let her work speak instead. She rose before dawn every morning and finished her task before the others had swallowed their breakfast coffee. She found tracks near the eastern fence line that belonged to no ranch horse and reported them to Caleb, who tripled the night patrols. She spotted rot in the grain storage 3 days before the spring rains came and proved her diagnosis correct. When a valuable broodmare went into difficult labor in the middle of the night, Ayanna stayed with her until sunrise, covered in blood and birth fluid, refusing to give up until both mother and foal survived. One by one, the doubters fell silent. But the real test came on a bright morning in late spring. A column of dust appeared on the road from town, growing larger by the minute, coming fast. Silas Crane arrived with an entourage that announced his power before he opened his mouth to speak a single word. Lawyers in city suits that cost more than most ranch hands earned in 2 years of hard labor. Accountants clutching leather ledgers stuffed with damning numbers. And Dutch Harmon, mounted on a coal-black stallion, with 6 armed men arranged behind him like a wall of muscle and gunmetal. Crane himself was smaller than Ayanna had expected. Soft, pale as milk, dressed in clothes so fine they seemed to glow against the dusty landscape. His voice, when he finally spoke, came out quiet and pleasant. The voice of a man who had never needed to raise it, because people always listened anyway. "Caleb," he smiled as he dismounted, brushing invisible dust from his tailored sleeves. "I heard congratulations are in order. You married the little Apache girl from the valley." His eyes found Ayanna and moved over her slowly, deliberately. "How very charming." Caleb said nothing. His right hand rested near his holster. Casual. Ready. "Marriage certificates can be terribly complicated," Crane continued smoothly, "especially when one party is of uncertain legal standing. I have lawyers who specialize in these delicate matters. Very thorough men. They find irregularities that others might miss." Dutch Harmon had begun walking a slow circuit of the yard, counting men, noting defensive positions, cataloging every weakness he could find. Ayanna tracked him with her eyes, memorizing every step of his patrol. He passed close to where Lily sat on the porch steps, playing quietly with a cornhusk doll that Thomas had made for her during the long wagon journey north. His boot struck the water bucket beside her. Hard, deliberate. The bucket spun away across the boards. Cold water splashed everywhere. Lily fell hard, crying out in surprise and pain as her small body hit the wooden planks. Ayanna moved. Later, she would not remember crossing the distance between them. One heartbeat, she stood near the corral fence. The next, she was 3 feet from Dutch Harmon, her hand resting on the grip of her pistol, close enough to see the old scar tissue around his dead eye. "Touch her again." Her voice carried across the silent yard like the crack of a whip. "I will take your other eye." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Dutch's hand had frozen halfway to his weapon. The thick white scar on his face stood out against skin that had suddenly flushed dark with rage. His jaw muscles worked beneath the weathered flesh. No one had ever mentioned his blind eye in public before. No one was supposed to know the full extent of his weakness. But Ayanna had watched him since the first morning he rode onto her family's land and threw Scout's body at her feet. She had studied how he turned his head to compensate for the dead side of his vision. She had mapped his blind spots in her memory, filed them away, saved them for exactly this kind of moment. Now everyone in the yard knew his secret. Crane's pleasant expression flickered like a candle in a sudden draft. Just for an instant. Then the mask slid smoothly back into place. "Interesting." His voice remained soft as ever. "Very interesting indeed." He turned toward his horse with exaggerated casualness. "We will speak again soon, Caleb. Very soon indeed." The entourage rode out in a cloud of dust and unspoken threats. That evening, Caleb found Ayanna cleaning her pistol by lamplight in their room. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "You made a dangerous enemy today." Dutch Harmon was already my enemy. She did not look up from her work. "Now he is an enemy who knows I am not afraid of him. There is a difference. There is also a difference between courage and recklessness. My sister was on the ground crying. What would you have done in my place?" He considered the question in silence. She could feel him weighing it honestly. "The same thing," he admitted finally. 3 days later, everything changed. One of the ranch hands was caught passing information to Crane's people in town. A man named Garrett, young, nervous, unable to meet anyone's eyes when confronted with the evidence of his betrayal. Caleb handled the interrogation personally in the barn, away from the other hands. Garrett broke within the hour. Crane had promised him $500 in gold and safe passage to California. All he had to do was report what he observed. Schedules, defenses, the daily routines of the ranch's key people. But there was more. "Crane knows about the Apache woman." Garrett's voice cracked with fear as he spoke. "He is not planning to fight you straight up. He is going to challenge the marriage in territorial court. He has a judge named Harrison in Santa Fe who will rule the whole thing invalid on technical grounds. Once the marriage is thrown out, the girl's family loses all legal protection. He takes their land first, Then he comes for yours. Caleb sent Garrett stumbling off the property with nothing but the clothes on his back and a warning that death would follow if he ever returned. That night, Caleb called everyone together in the main house. We have 5 days before the hearing in Santa Fe. Crane has Judge Harrison bought and paid for. If we walk into that courtroom with nothing but our word against his, we lose everything. Henry Cole leaned forward in his chair, his weathered face grim. What exactly do we need? Proof. Hard evidence. The debt documents Crane used against the Red Hawks are forgeries. I would stake my life on it. If we can get our hands on his original records, show the court the pattern of what he has been doing to families across this territory. His private office is above the bank in Rio Seco. Ayanna spoke quietly from her seat by the window. Every eye in the room turned toward her. 2 guards at night, sometimes 3. I can get inside. Caleb studied her face for a long moment. Something passed between them that required no words. Not alone, he said finally. We go together. The night before they left for Rio Seco, Caleb rode out alone after supper without explanation. He returned before dawn, his horse lathered with sweat, his face revealing nothing. The marshal knows everything, he said when Ayanna asked where he had been. Just those 4 words. He had sent copies of everything they suspected about Crane to the federal marshal's office in Albuquerque 2 days earlier using a trusted writer. Insurance, he called it, a backup plan in case the territorial court failed them completely. Smart, thorough. The thinking of a man who had learned never to rely on a single strategy when his life was at stake. Rio Seco slept beneath a moonless sky. They left their horses tied a mile outside of town and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows that pooled between buildings like dark water. The bank rose 3 stories above the surrounding wooden structures, its brick facade a symbol of permanence and power. A single lamp glowed amber in the top floor window. Crane's private office. 2 guards stood at the front entrance, rifles cradled loosely in their arms. A third man walked the building's perimeter in a slow circuit, his boots crunching on gravel in a steady, predictable rhythm. Caleb touched Ayanna's arm and pointed toward the saloon at the far end of the main street. She nodded understanding. He circled wide through the darkness, disappearing between buildings. Ayanna turned her attention to the bank itself. The rear wall was rough-cut stone, uneven and weathered, full of handholds and crevices. She climbed in complete silence, her fingers finding purchase in the gaps between stones. The window on the 2nd floor was locked tight. The one on the 3rd floor was not. She slipped inside like smoke. The office smelled of expensive cigar smoke and French cologne. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the room, its surface buried under papers and leather-bound ledgers and correspondence bearing official seals. Filing cabinets lined every wall. Ayanna moved quickly, methodically, with purpose. She had learned to read English from a missionary's wife who had taken pity on a barefoot Apache girl with hungry eyes. She had learned numbers from watching her father get cheated at the trading post year after year, memorizing the ways white men hid their theft behind columns of figures and fine print. She found what she was looking for in the 3rd filing cabinet, a folder thick with documents, debt papers from more than a dozen families across the territory, all showing the same damning pattern of inflated interest rates, fabricated fees, forged signatures. And at the very back, a leather-bound journal filled with names and dollar figures written in Crane's own careful hand. Payments to Sheriff Morgan for ignoring reported crimes. Payments to Judge Harrison for favorable rulings in land dispute cases. Payments to county commissioners and territorial officials. A complete, meticulous record of every man Silas Crane had ever purchased. Footsteps in the hallway outside. Ayanna pressed herself flat against the wall beside the door. The folder clutched tight against her chest. Her heart pounded so loud she was certain it would give her away. The footsteps paused outside the office door. A key scraped in the lock. The door swung open on oiled hinges. Dutch Harmon stepped into the room. He sensed her presence before he saw her. Some animal instinct honed by decades of violence. His hand moved toward his belt in a blur of motion. Not toward his gun, toward his knife. Close quarters. Dark room. A blade was faster and quieter. Ayanna struck first. Her own knife was in her hand before conscious thought caught up with instinct. She aimed for his gun arm, trying to disable him quickly. But he was faster than she had expected. The blade caught him across the forearm instead of the wrist, drawing a dark line of blood but not crippling him. He swung at her face, a vicious backhand blow that would have shattered her jaw if it had connected. She ducked under it, drove her elbow hard into his ribs, felt something crack beneath the impact. But Dutch Harmon had not survived this long by being easy to kill. His left hand found her throat like a striking snake. He slammed her backward against the wall with enough force to drive the breath from her lungs. His face was inches from hers, close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath. The dead eye stared at nothing. The living eye burned with cold, murderous fury. "Little Apache bitch!" His voice came out as a whisper, almost gentle, almost loving. "I have been waiting for this moment. I am going to take my time with you." Ayanna could not breathe. Black spots swam at the edges of her vision like flies circling carrion. His grip was iron, unbreakable. Her flailing hand found the letter opener on the desk beside her. She drove it deep into his shoulder with every ounce of strength she had left. Dutch screamed and released her, staggering backward, the metal handle protruding from his flesh. She grabbed the folder, threw herself headlong at the window, and crashed through the glass into the empty night. The fall was 12 feet to hard-packed dirt. She rolled when she hit the ground, absorbing the impact across her shoulder and back the way her grandfather had taught her when she was barely old enough to walk. But something tore deep in her shoulder, and fire lanced down her arm like liquid agony. She ran anyway. Caleb was waiting at the edge of town with both horses already mounted, ready to move. He saw the blood soaking through her sleeve in the moonlight, the way she cradled her injured arm against her body. He did not waste time with questions. He pulled her up behind him, and they rode hard into the welcoming darkness. Behind them, the town of Rio Seco exploded into torchlight and shouting voices. They reached the ranch as dawn broke bloody over the eastern mountains. Smoke rose from the direction of the main barn. Ayanna's heart seized in her chest like a fist had closed around it. The barn was gone, reduced to blackened timbers and glowing embers that sent sparks spiraling up toward the pale sky. The chicken coop was gray ash, scattered by the wind. 2 of the bunkhouses had burned completely to their stone foundations. Crane had not waited for the court hearing. Henry Cole met them in the central yard, his weathered face streaked with soot and dried blood. His left arm hung in a makeshift sling torn from someone's shirt. "They hit us hard about 2 hours after you rode out," he reported, his voice flat with exhaustion. 15 men, maybe more. Well armed, well organized. We drove them off eventually. But it cost us." He gestured at the smoldering destruction surrounding them. "Lost the main barn with everything in it. Most of the horses. 3 hands wounded bad. 1 dead. The children." Ayanna's voice came out as barely a whisper, rough with fear. "Safe and sound. Your father held the main house door all night long with that old shotgun of his. Damn near coughed himself to death doing it, but nobody got through him." Relief flooded through her like spring melt, followed immediately by cold rage. Caleb surveyed the damage with eyes that had gone hard as flint. His jaw was set tight enough to crack teeth. "The hearing is in 3 days," he said. "We ride for Santa Fe at first light tomorrow." "I should go alone." Ayanna touched his arm. "Crane wants me specifically. If I am not here, maybe he will leave the ranch alone long enough for—" "No." His voice left absolutely no room for argument or discussion. "We finish this thing together, or we do not finish it at all." The Santa Fe courthouse was packed with spectators on the morning of the hearing. Ranchers from across the territory had traveled for days to watch the proceedings. They filled every bench, lined every wall, spilled out onto the wooden sidewalk outside. Crane sat in the front row, surrounded by his expensive lawyers, his expression as serene and confident as a man attending Sunday church services. Judge Harrison presided from the elevated bench at the front of the room, his face carefully arranged in a mask of judicial impartiality. Dutch Harmon was notably absent. Rumor whispered through the crowd said he had fled north immediately after the failed raid on the Walker Ranch. Montana Territory, perhaps Canada, somewhere he could let his wounds heal and his hatred grow in peace. The prosecution presented its case first. They painted Ayanna as a schemer and a fortune hunter, an illegal presence exploiting loopholes in American laws to steal American land from rightful owners. They questioned the validity of Apache marriage customs. The legitimacy of unions between races, the very right of people with red skin to own property or offer testimony in an American court of law. Then it was Ayana's turn to speak. She rose slowly from her seat. She was still wearing the same clothes from the desperate escape from Rio Seco. Her arm was wrapped in bandages, already showing spots of fresh blood. Bruises marked her face in shades of purple and yellow. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had been fighting for her life and had not yet stopped fighting. She walked to the front of the silent courtroom and placed the thick folder on the clerk's desk with a heavy thump. "My name is Ayana Red Hawk Walker." Her voice came out steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the packed room. 3 months ago, a man named Silas Crane sent armed riders to my family's home in the Rio Seco Valley. They killed our dog and threw his body at my feet. They told us our children would be next if we did not cooperate. Then they presented us with a debt we had never owed, a debt manufactured from forged documents and fraudulent calculations. Murmuring rippled through the gallery like wind through dry grass. Judge Harrison's gavel came down sharply. "These documents contain the original papers used against my family," Ayana continued as if she had not been interrupted. "They also contain papers from 14 other families across this territory. Every single one shows the exact same pattern: illegally inflated interest rates, fees for services never rendered, signatures forged by the same hand." She opened the folder and held up a page covered with cramped handwriting for everyone in the room to see. "This is Silas Crane's personal journal, taken from his private office. It lists payments made to Sheriff Morgan for ignoring reported crimes against ranch families, payments to county commissioners for approving fraudulent land transfers." She paused, met Judge Harrison's eyes directly, holding his gaze without flinching. "And payments to Judge William Harrison for favorable rulings in land dispute cases, exposed for all to see." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Crane shot to his feet, his face flushing purple with rage, veins standing out on his temples. His lawyers scrambled desperately through their papers, shouting objections that no one could hear above the roar. Judge Harrison's gavel hammered uselessly against the bench again and again. Crane's lead attorney finally made himself heard above the noise. "These documents could easily be fabricated. This woman admits to breaking into private property. Nothing she presents should be considered admissible in any legitimate court." Ayana did not flinch or look away. "Then let this court examine the handwriting with expert witnesses. Let them compare the forged signatures against genuine samples. Let them interview the 14 families whose land was stolen using these exact methods." She turned slowly to face the packed gallery behind her. "How many of you received threatening letters from Crane's bank? How many of you paid debts you knew in your hearts you never truly owed?" Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Then slowly, weathered hands began to rise throughout the gallery. 1, 3, 7. A dozen ranchers with sun-darkened faces and work-scarred hands, acknowledging publicly what they had been too frightened or too ashamed to say aloud for years. Judge Harrison's gavel faltered mid-swing and stopped. A man in a dark coat with a federal marshal's star pinned to his chest stepped forward from the back of the courtroom. He had been sitting unnoticed throughout the entire proceedings, watching silently, waiting patiently for exactly this moment. "Silas Crane." His voice cut through the lingering chaos like a knife through soft butter. "You are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and numerous other federal charges. Judge Harrison, you will surrender yourself to federal custody pending a thorough investigation into corruption of the territorial judiciary." 2 more marshals materialized at the courtroom doors, hands resting on their holstered weapons. Crane's face went white as bleached bone. He turned desperately toward the exit, but there was nowhere left to run. The crowd pressed close on every side, and the marshals were already moving toward him with handcuffs ready. Ayana watched them lead him away in irons, his expensive suit rumpled, his carefully constructed dignity finally shattered beyond repair. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a bone-deep exhaustion that reached down into the very center of her being. It was finally over. 3 months later, the Walker Ranch spread beneath a sky so deeply blue it almost hurt to look at directly. The new barn stood tall and proud where the old one had burned. Fresh pine timber, bright gold against the weathered gray of the older buildings surrounding it. Fat cattle dotted the green hillsides, content on summer grass that grew thick and rich. The sound of hammers and saws and honest laughter filled the warm air as workers raised fences and walls that would stand strong for generations to come. Ayana stood alone on the ridge above the main house, looking out over land that was now legally and irrevocably hers. Beyond the reach of any manufactured debts or purchased judges or men who thought they could take whatever they wanted from people too weak to stop them. Below, she could hear Sam and Lily arguing loudly about whose turn it was to collect eggs from the new chicken coop. Their voices carried on the warm summer breeze, light and carefree and full of the simple joy of children who no longer woke in the night, wondering if tomorrow would bring men with guns and torches. Thomas sat on the wide front porch in a rocking chair, wrapped in a light blanket despite the summer warmth. But he was breathing easier these days, she noticed. The clean mountain air agreed with his damaged lungs in ways the dusty valley never had. He had gained weight. Color had returned to his hollow cheeks. He would never be the strong man he had been before the mines took their toll, but he would live to see his grandchildren. He would die in his own bed surrounded by family instead of alone in some company hospital, far from everyone he loved. Footsteps approached from behind. Ayana did not need to turn around. She knew the sound of his walk by now, the rhythm of his steady breathing, the way he moved through the world with quiet confidence. Caleb stopped beside her on the ridge, thumbs hooked comfortably in his worn leather belt, eyes squinting slightly against the afternoon sun. Henry says we will have all the new fencing finished well before the first snow flies. Good. Silence stretched between them, but it was different now than it had been at the beginning. Comfortable. Easy. The silence of two people who no longer needed constant words to understand each other. I still owe you a debt, Ayana said finally. What debt is that? You saved my family, gave us a home when we had none, gave us a future when ours had been stolen. Caleb shook his head slowly, his gray eyes still fixed on the distant mountains. You saved this ranch from Crane, exposed his corruption for everyone to see, protected every soul living under this roof with your courage. He turned to look at her directly. Really look the way he had looked at her that first cold morning at her family's fence when he made his unexpected offer. The way I calculate it, we are exactly even. She held his gaze. He was not handsome in any conventional sense. His face was too weathered by years of sun and wind and hard living. His nose had been broken too many times and healed crooked. His gray eyes held shadows of terrible things he had witnessed during the war. Things he would never speak of and she would never ask about. But when he looked at her, she saw something precious she had not expected to find in any man's eyes. Respect, not for what she could do for him, not for how she looked or how she made him feel, but for who she truly was at her core, for what she had survived against all odds, for what she had built from the ashes of a life that had tried its very best to destroy her and everyone she loved. Even, she repeated softly. He nodded once. They stood together on the ridge as the sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains. Golden light spilled across the endless grassland like honey. Shadows stretched long and purple across the valley below, where cattle grazed peacefully. This had never been a love story. Neither of them had ever believed in such romantic nonsense. Love was a luxury for people who could afford weakness, for people who had never learned that survival in a hard world required much harder currency than soft feelings and pretty words. But standing there shoulder to shoulder, looking out over land they had both bled to protect, Ayana understood something important. Love was not always lightning striking from a clear sky, not always fire that consumed everything it touched. Sometimes love was stone, laid carefully, one piece at a time, built slowly over months and years through shared struggle and mutual respect, and the quiet knowledge that someone would stand beside you without flinching when the darkness came. And sometimes she realized that was more than enough. Dutch Harmon was never found. Rumors placed him in Montana Territory, Oregon, across the border somewhere in Mexico, where American law could not follow. Some whispered that he had finally died of the wounds Ayana had given him, alone and unmourned in some nameless town where no one knew his face or cared about his many sins. Ayana did not believe the rumors, not for a single moment. Late at night, When the ranch had fallen quiet and the stars burned cold and distant overhead in their ancient patterns, she would sometimes walk up to the ridge alone and look north, toward the dark mountains that faded blue into the endless darkness, toward wild places where a man could disappear completely and nurse his hatred in secret until it grew into something worth dying for. Dutch Harmon was out there somewhere. She was certain of it in her bones. The deep scar she had carved into his shoulder would never fully heal. The humiliation she had delivered in front of Crane's men and half the territory would never be forgotten or forgiven. Men like Dutch Harmon did not forgive those who had wounded their pride. They did not forget those who had made them bleed. They simply waited, patient as winter, certain as death itself. One day when she least expected it, he would return to settle the score. And when that day finally came, Ayanna would be ready. She checked the Winchester one final time by starlight, worked the smooth lever action, felt the familiar weight of well-oiled steel in her capable hands. Then she walked back down the ridge toward the warm lights of home, toward her family safe inside, toward the life she had fought so hard to build and would fight even harder to keep. The night swallowed her quiet footsteps, but she was not afraid of the dark. She had never been afraid of darkness. She had learned long ago that darkness itself was not the enemy. The enemy was anyone foolish enough to believe they could take what belonged to her. And she had proven beyond any shadow of doubt what happened to people who made that fatal mistake.
The story conveys a very practical lesson. Evil doesn't always manifest through guns and bullets, but often lurks in distorted documents, numbers, and laws. Silas Crane didn't need to seize land directly. He created fake debts and used his power to bribe his way into legality. Therefore, justice doesn't exist on its own. If people remain silent out of fear, injustice will inevitably prevail. The morality of honest people is most clearly tested when they are pushed to the brink. The protagonist could have easily pulled the trigger in a fit of rage, but she understood that a moment of anger could cost the lives of loved ones. Courage here isn't recklessness, but rather self-restraint in choosing a path to protect life and the future. Sometimes, the greatest strength is daring to endure humiliation for a moment so as not to lose everything. The story also shows how power reveals human nature. People like Crane and Dutch treat others as property and dignity as something to be trampled upon. When the girl stands tall without bowing her head, she affirms a fundamental truth. Human beings are not commodities to be bargained for. Maintaining dignity is the ultimate boundary between being oppressed and remaining true to oneself. Ultimately, the work emphasizes the power of truth and alliance. A lone individual is easily crushed, but when the truth is brought to light, others dare to stand up. Evil grows through scattered fear, but weakens when people speak out together. Freedom, therefore, is not a ready-made gift. It requires ability, strategy, and timely courage. The strong are not those who retaliate indiscriminately, but those who know how to resist appropriately to protect life, dignity, and tomorrow.